Good afternoon, everyone. We have about a half an hour, so we're going to go through our PowerPoint presentation, and then if you have any questions, we're around, and I think most of you know that we have a table, so we're available tomorrow all day to answer any questions you may have. So in addition to being in private law practice, I've represented a number, many more than a number, probably 100 or so people with connective tissue disorders and disability hearings throughout the United States. And so I think the first thing we'll start with is just making the decision to file for Social Security disability. And before we get a little bit into that, there are two types of Social Security disability that are available through the federal government. One is Social Security disability insurance, and that is basically when you've put into the system by working, okay, it's the same kind of pool of money that is available for retirement Social Security. And so once you worked and accumulated money in quarters, if you are disabled, you're available, there's money available to collect from that pool of money. If you haven't worked, or if you have a child that is disabled, okay, and you haven't put into the system, there's money called supplemental security income. The problem with supplemental security income is it is income and asset-based. So if you haven't worked and you haven't put into the system, you have to have a very low income and no assets in order to just be eligible for that program. And with children under 18 years old, they're going to look at the household income. Okay, so they're going to look at the parents to see whether or not they kind of fit that monetary floor, so to speak. So that can be a little difficult sometimes. If you do have a child that's disabled and the child's not eligible because of the parent's income, once they turn 18, they're going to be eligible on their own, okay, because they're adults at that point. So I think John's going to talk to just making the decision to file, and this is more for someone, again, who has worked and who, has maybe had a career, and sometimes it can be a difficult decision to make.
I get a chance to speak?
Yeah.
Okay. One of the first things is the health considerations. That's the reason why you're filing in the first place, and for me, it had a lot to do with I tried very hard to keep my job. I had a very hard time keeping my career, but I was literally getting sicker and sicker and sicker, and I started diminishing my hours. So the health considerations are number one. A lot of times, many people, including me, are in denial, and they figure they can continue to work. The only problem is I probably should have filed for disability 11 years before I actually did file, and God knows what damage I did to my body in that time. So I always tell people to really think the process. Remember that every year, every moment you put yourself through stress with a connective tissue disorder, it could be a major problem down the road. The next consideration, of course, is financial considerations. That was a consideration that really bothered me because I had a very lucrative career. The last thing I want to do is not work. And then when you stop working, you don't have that income. So that absolutely is a major consideration. But then again, health trumps the financial considerations. And the last thing is the emotional, which is probably one of the hardest parts, because my brain and my body were in conflict because my brain kept saying, you can continue to work. And my body was like, no, you can't. You can't work. You're getting worse and worse. So that's when you have to kind of make the two in harmony and say, this is something I have to do. And it's not the end of the world. It's actually a beginning of a new one. And that's how I've gotten into the work I'm doing now because of it.
Very good.
Oh, thank you. She said no. She just graded me. Told me it was very good. Thanks.
So initially, of course, you're going to have to file for Social Security disability, and you can actually do it one of two ways. You can do it online nowadays, okay? If you go to www.ssa.gov, there's a little key for apply for disability. And I'm going to tell you in a second all the information that you're going to have. But you can do it on the computer, and you don't have to do it all in one sitting. You can actually kind of put in the information that you have. They'll give you a reentry number, and you can come back and put in the rest of the information. You can also apply in person, and Again, if you go to the website, they have an 800 number. You can call the 800 number and make an appointment with your local office and actually go and sit in front of someone. And Jon's going to talk a little bit about his experience with that. But before that, the information that you're going to need, whether you decide to do it online or in person, is all of your medical doctors, hospitalizations, testing, and I would probably go at least a year before you stopped working, if not maybe 2. Of course, if there's relevant information before that, you would include that as well. All of your medications, and again, all of your doctors. So, you know, most of those of us or those with EDS have a number of practitioners. You want to make sure you include everybody, and including if you're seeing any kind of, you know, if you have any kind of mental disorders, if you're seeing a psychiatrist, psychologist, that's going to be important as well. And you're going to need your last 15 years of your work history. Okay, so where you worked, what you did specifically. They're going to need to know things like, you know, what type of work. If it was manual work, how much did you lift? You know, how much did you stand, walk, and, you know, how long you sat, that kind of thing. So they do kind of specific into that, because part of the process is going to be determining whether or not you can do your prior job, and then determining whether or not you can do any other job in the economy. So Jon's going to talk a little bit about his experience when he applied.
Some of you may already know my experience through the webinars I've done in the past, or talks that you've heard me talk before. But when I decided to file, I thought, just, I'm a very social person. I'll go in to Social Security and I'll file personally. So given that what I told you and how I had a very lucrative career, the last thing I want to do is file for disability. I go into the office and I'm waiting for the person to see me. I'm told, okay, you can go in now. I go in, and the first thing the guy says to me is, "You're disabled?" And I felt my fingers clench into a fist. And I literally was going to punch him in the face and knock him over the desk. And I thought, that's not going to get me disability. But all of a sudden, my brain, it just happened. I never thought of it before. And I said, "Sir, let me just tell you part of my disability. Think about the last time you had a bad cold and you ached all over and you had hardly any energy. You felt like crap. You probably didn't want to go to school or work, wherever you were going that day. That's how I feel 2 days a week." And I let him think about it. And then I said, "Now think about the last time you had a bad flu. You had hardly energy at all. Just getting to the bathroom was a major, major effort. You hurt from head to toe. You definitely could not go to work." I said, "I feel like that 4 to 5 days a week." So at that, his face turned beet red like an apple. And at that point, actually, he was very nice. He said, "Please sit down." And then I went on to explain further things of why I am disabled. But the main reason that he did ask that question is because, look at me. Do I look disabled to you? Well, disability is not necessarily a wheelchair or braces. Disability is the inability to work 40 hours a week on a continued basis for a year or more. That's what it is. Sadly, unfortunately, the disability system and the doctors, most doctors, don't know what an invisible disability is.
And what Jon did, whether or not he realized it, but that's kind of important throughout the process. You have to be able to communicate what you're going through, what your limitations are. And if you can do so by examples, you know, that's very key. All right, so it's one thing to say, "I have fatigue every day." Okay, it's another thing to give a very concrete example like Jon did. Okay, and so that can become important throughout the process. So Jon was, when he applied, was frustrated with the process. And I, of course, am an attorney, and I had handled these cases before, although I wasn't handling his case. And we decided to try to do what we could to try to help people in the beginning of the process, because as we'll talk about in a little bit, it can be, quite lengthy. And this is kind of a checklist that we came up with. You want to talk about some?
Well, she asked me if I want to talk about it. I said, well, I created most of it. So the first thing, filling out the forms, it sounds simple, but answer the questions. And if there's any possibility that has to do with the question and the answer, put in something that has to do with limitations, how you're limited, what's your limitation. For some reason, Social Security loves the word limited. So if you're limited this, limited that, and then give them, like Kathleen said, give them some explanations as to what the limitations are. So if you do have daily fatigue, mention it, and maybe mention something in the daily activity as far as, like I did by showing my doctors about understanding what I'm going through, as I told them about I can't take a shower every day because I don't have the energy to do it. It's not because I'm lazy. So things like that are good to be able to explain. State funding programs, that's just to see if whatever state you are, to see if there's any assistance programs. Not all states are the same. In fact, we're almost like 50 countries. There's so many differences, but it's always good to see what you have in your state to assist you in the interim when you're trying to get approved, because approval can take quite a while. The support letter, do you want to talk about the support part?
Yes, so one of the most important things is to have the support of your doctor, obviously. And if you don't have your doctor on board with this, then truthfully, you probably need to get another doctor, okay? Because it's absolutely key through this process that your doctor is on board, believes that you're not able to work anymore, and is going to be willing to be behind you in that. You know, a lot of people will say to me, well, my doctor is afraid to put in writing that I'm disabled. He doesn't really kind of know what that means. And guess what? That's correct. According to the Social Security Administration, you know, a doctor, no matter what his qualifications or her qualifications, is not the one to determine whether or not a person is disabled, okay? What a doctor can do is express what your limitations are. Okay, and John used the word limitations before, but so it's, and of course you have to be able to express that to your doctor, but he doesn't have to put in writing, you know, Joe Smith is disabled. What I usually use is a form that does just that, go through what a person's limitations are, and I ask, you know, my client's doctor to complete the form, usually, obviously, with the, you know, the claimant, the person's input. And you know, it goes through things, you know, how long can you sit, how long can you stand, how long can you walk, but also how long can you function throughout the day, okay? And this is probably important to all of us. If you're going to work, again, the definition for Social Security working is, you know, 40 hours a week, 8 hours a day. And in your typical job, basically, you get a 15-minute break in the morning, you get a half hour for lunch, and a 15-minute break in the afternoon. Other than that, whatever you're doing, you're supposed to be what they refer to as on task, okay? So you're supposed to be concentrating pretty much all the time on what you're doing, whether that's at a desk or it's a manual job, whatever it is, you're supposed to be concentrating and focused on what you're doing. And if you can't do that, okay, because of fatigue, because of pain, because of the fact that even though, you know, you can sit, maybe you can't sit all day, maybe you can't sit without having to stand after an hour, okay? Or maybe you have to sit and stand, maybe you have to raise your legs. All of those things go into whether or not you can actually, you know, function in a 40-hour-a-week job. And so they're the things that you have to communicate to your doctor, and they're the things that the doctor has to hopefully communicate, you know, to Social Security through some forms that they can fill out.
And getting them to understand, I should mention this, the one night I sat up when I started the process, and I thought, do my doctors really understand my limitations? And the answer is no. And the main reason is part of it was my fault, because I always have like a brave face when I go see the doctor. In fact, a lot of us do that. So I wrote a what makes you disabled statement, which was my full limitations about standing, sitting, fatigue, pain. And I brought it in. It was written, and I gave it to three of my doctors. And one of them actually got emotional. He says, wow, you live like this? And I go, yeah, this is what I live with. And the other doctor had to actually sit down and read it because he was so moved by it. And he goes, I didn't know this. I says, well, that's partly my fault, but now that you do, you know, help me. And that's how you can really show your doctor to help you, is by showing you what you're living with every day. It's really important for them to know. And like Kathy said, if you can't, you know, if you have to get up every so often, or if you have to go to the bathroom every so often, or you can't stand for long, can't sit, no one's going to keep you on the job. Anything else on the outside?
We want to go through, we only have like 10 minutes.
Okay, sorry.
So the process is such that you can be approved early. When I say early, when you first apply, they're probably going to take about 3 or 4 months to make a decision, okay? A lot of people are denied at that point. If you're going to be approved in the beginning, a lot of times it's because whatever you have, your disease or disorder, meets something the Social Security refers to as their listing of impairments. Okay, and it's literally that, a list of conditions that if you meet the criteria of that condition that's listed in the book, and there's literally, they call it the blue book, then you're going to be approved. Okay, Ehlers-Danlos is not in the listing of impairments. Okay, so we already kind of have a battle to begin with. But, you know, again, most people are going to be denied the first time. I think the statistic is maybe only 25% of people that apply the first time are going to be approved. And again, they're probably going to hit that, listing of impairment pretty much on point if they are. If you don't make the listing of impairment, okay, they do have something kind of the next level called your residual functional capacity. And this is where most people are going to be approved under this definition. So the Social Security Administration, and if you go before a judge, the judge is going to have to take into consideration all of your limitations, okay, everything that you go through, all of your disease, disorders, conditions, symptoms, all together, okay, to determine whether or not, with all of that, what's left over, you can perform that 40-hour-a-week job, okay? Residual functional capacity is the definition that they use to approve if you're not in that listing of impairment, okay? So after your initial application, again, 3 or 4 months, then you go into what we call the reconsideration phase, okay? The reconsideration phase is basically someone else at Social Security looking at your application and, determining whether or not you fit into their categories, so to speak. I think the statistic now is there's only probably 10 to 15% of people who are then approved at the reconsideration phase, okay? Then if you are denied again at reconsideration, that's probably another 3 or 4 months reconsideration. Then you go into the next phase where you appeal and you apply for a hearing in front of an administrative law judge, okay? That can take, to get to the hearing, that can take over a year, okay? That's why this process is so long and so difficult. I just had someone, and again, it varies by state and where you are in the country. I just had someone, I think, from Washington State who said that their wait time for a hearing was 2+ years, okay? So that's why, this process can be extremely long. In Massachusetts, in Boston, we're lucky, we're probably around a year. But still, even a year after you've already been through minimum 6 months is a long time. Remember, you're not working during this period of time, okay? As a matter of fact, if you are, everybody says, well, can I work and apply? Well, you can, but guess what? If you're working and making more than, it changes every year, but if you're making more than $1,100 a month gross, then you're not considered disabled, okay? So obviously, that's not a lot of money, so you can't really work. We're going to talk about the hearing, but if you're not successful at the hearing, then you can go to the Appeals Council, which is just a body within Social Security looking at the hearing to determine whether or not that was correct. You can take it to federal district court. Again, like all appeals, it's extremely difficult to win at that level. So the hearing is probably, that's your time. That's the most important part of this process. I said to someone, I was explaining kind of, how difficult the process has become. When I first started doing this 15, 20 years ago, or say even 10 years ago, if you went to a hearing, basically overall, the percentage of people that were approved at a hearing was about 70%, okay? Now it's less than 50%, okay? So, and there are judges out there, and again, you can't pick and choose who your judges, but there are judges out there who only approve less than 20% of people that come before them, okay? So this is a difficult process.
And that's why, all the more reason why you want to make sure you have enough information, the right information in what you submit, the doctor's support, information, research, your condition from doctors. You can utilize that as long as you have those diagnoses, and as long as you have that severity. That's very helpful.
So the hearing is your time, though, and again, what Jon said was important. You want to be prepared. You probably need a lawyer at this point. Jon helps a lot of people in the beginning process, but if you're going to go in front of a judge, it is an evidentiary hearing. Okay, you are under oath. Okay, you can have witnesses. They can have witnesses, including a vocational expert, which we'll talk about in a second. So this is really the time when you probably need a lawyer. What Jon said just a minute ago is also important. What I usually do when I represent people is, I submit information, medical information about what your condition is, especially if it's a rare disorder. Okay, you're probably going to get a judge who has no idea what Ehlers-Danlos syndrome is. Okay, so why not try to educate them as much as possible? Okay, so I usually submit a lot of medical articles, which, hopefully helps. And again, the hearing is your time to get everything out there. You're going to, of course, testify, but you want to advocate as much as possible. You and your lawyers should try to advocate for what your position is and for the fact that you can't work. You can have witnesses. Again, it's not necessary to have witnesses, but they are allowed. If you're not really able to communicate what you go through, then it's probably a good idea to maybe have someone who can do that for you. Okay, but judges don't necessarily want someone who's going to testify to the same thing that you just testified to. Vocational experts are usually at a hearing. A vocational expert is there to tell the judge whether or not there are jobs that you can do, that, in the regional and the national economy. So basically what happens is, after your testimony, the judge is going to give what they call a hypothetical question to the vocational expert. So the judge will say something to the vocational expert in terms of, if you have a hypothetical person of this claimant's age, education, work experience, with the following limitations, and they're the ones you probably just testified to, hopefully, are there jobs that you can perform, or he or she can perform? And sometimes the judge will give a couple hypotheticals. Your lawyer, if you have a lawyer, is able to cross-examine the vocational expert. Okay, so it's kind of another reason to have someone who kind of knows what that process is.
And Kathleen loves that process. She loves going up against the vocational experts, and she loves it when they have a doctor that's there, that's claiming the person can't work, but then Kathleen will say, like, how many EDS patients do you have? No, you have none.
Yeah, they usually don't have medical experts at hearings, but when they do, I'm very happy because, their medical expert is usually your average, less than average PCP who knows nothing about Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, okay? And, I've been coming to conferences for 10 years, and just the information, if this is your first conference, you probably know more than a medical doctor about EDS at this point. So that's okay. Administrative hearings, they only take about 45 minutes. They're informal. The judge is not supposed to be adversarial. However, believe me when I say you can get judges that are adversarial, and you just have to, be willing to advocate as much as possible for yourself. And
if at possible, if your doctor is willing to come to the hearing, that's very helpful, because they take care of you. Kathleen's actually had, we don't have enough time, but Kathleen actually had a case where the doctor came in, he was a very knowledgeable doctor, very well-known doctor in that condition, and the judge was a total jerk to him. But still, because of his testimony, they were approved.
Yeah, I mean, it's very rare for a doctor to come to a hearing, and I was just lucky enough to have a Marfan doctor. We're involved in the Marfan organization, and one of their patients, this absolute expert in Marfans, actually came to the hearing, which was like unbelievable, and the judge treated him awful, and I I felt so bad. I felt like saying, like, this is like probably like one of the top 10 Marfan doctors in the world, and you're treating him like this. But they don't care about that.
So the doctor actually had a better appreciation of what Kathleen does, because he was like, wow, I can't believe that guy talked to me the way he did. He goes, that's how he talks. That's how they do it. Not all of them, though. Some of them are very. We have a little bit of time. You want to tell you a quick story about the judge, the accident that the judge had?
Oh, somebody said to me today, they were talking about the fact that they dislocate, and we were, talking about hearings and how that's important. I actually did have a hearing with an EDS person, and she dislocated all the time, and that's what she testified to, probably daily. And, she testified that her boyfriend would put her shoulders back in, everything that you guys go through. And at the end of the hearing, or the end of her testimony, the judge, who was, I think he was like white, and he was white in the face, and he said, I dislocated once in a surfing accident years ago. It was the worst pain I ever had in my life. No one wanted to help me, not even the ambulance. I didn't get help until I got to the ER, and it was awful. And you're approved, because
right on the spot.
Unfortunately, we don't all get judges that have had a dislocation, But
The other thing is, and I've got a lot of brain fog, which I know a lot of you can identify, is also to have list subluxations and dislocations, and make sure your doctors understand what they are and that they put them in the record, because they alone can be disabling. So it's really important to do that.
Anybody have a question? If we have a minute or two, yeah.
So I was wondering, it's kind of a combination. You had mentioned listing the last 15 years of your work experience. Is that the minimum number of work years you have to have, or was that just a number that you had listed?
So no matter where you are in your work experience, they're going to want to know
Is there a minimum number?
So basically, and this is very general, so in order to have enough credits, okay, which I talked about in the beginning, to be eligible for SSDI, where you put into the system, you have to have worked 5 out of the last 10 years, okay? That's very general. And you can talk to me specifically about this, but this becomes very important, because I've represented a number of people where they stopped working, okay, probably because they had to, but they kept on thinking, well, I'm going to go back to work, I'm going to get better, and all of a sudden, time goes on, they're losing their credits, all right? Now, they're not eligible, and now we have to go back and prove that they were disabled at a point in time years ago, okay? Which, as you can imagine, can be quite difficult. I mean, I have someone now who has EDS, and we're trying to prove that she was disabled in 2015, okay, which she was, okay, of course she was, and we're doing everything to prove that, and I have been successful in doing that before, but it's not easy, so, just kind of be wary of that.
Still have time for questions.
You say 5 of the last 10 years, is that full-time or any type of work, maybe part-time?
Well, part-time still counts, but again, it's gonna, the more that you work, the more credits you have, the more you're going to get in terms of if you are approved. But yeah, part-time would still count. Yes. You.
Thanks for your time today.
Yes.
Very informative. My adult child came. My adult child, well, I don't like this, came to live with me again because medical expenses, insurances were prohibitive. So we felt this was the best way to go on. Does that get held against her if she were to apply for support?
So she is an adult, okay, so it's going to be her income that's going to count towards this. Has she worked before, or okay. So if you've worked, then you're going to have your own record, okay? If, your quarters, your credits have expired and you have to apply for SSI, that's going to be okay, but mom should be charging you rent, okay? Because if she's not, if you want to end up getting SSI, that would be decreased by a third because your parent is contributing to your living expenses. So charge her rent. Well, she can't, you can have a contract with her that says that, you're charging her and she can pay when she has it.
Remember, Kathy, this is being recorded.
Yeah, right, okay. Yes.
I don't like that either. So I've already gotten past the court hearing, and I had a judge. The first time I was denied, I did not. The second one I did, and then it got to the hearing. I'm wondering what and if there's a time frame after we have the hearing. I know we were granted 30 days to get more medical in, but what is the maximum they have to make a decision?
They don't. There's nothing in writing that says that they have a maximum. And I've had decisions take up to 6, 8 months. That's usually not what happens. It's usually more like 2 or 3, but I have had that. Looks like we're out of time, but if you guys have any questions, again, we're going to be around to
Yeah,
talk.
we have the table out here.
Yes.
Yeah,